the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Note for the record that all council members are present.
Our new business tonight is to continue with the general plan update. Item 1, received report on methodology for arriving at regional housing needs assessment number for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Council requested staff report back on the regional housing needs assessment methodology that CCAG is using. The staff report includes an attached chart that shows the methodologies that were looked at to arrive at the regional housing needs assessment number. The originally proposed methodology by CCAG is called sub-RHNA methodology. It's the one in the second column in the chart. Originally, it produced the lowest number of housing need number for the city, but it was based entirely on household growth, 100% household growth. Several cities at the Technical Advisory Committee, including Daly City, took issue with the methodology since it tended to penalize cities that already were providing more housing than others. 4 other methodologies were discussed. They were variations of different weights given to different factors, including household growth, existing jobs, job growth, household growth near transit, and job growth near transit. That was the 5 weight categories that were given weight in the methodology. And that methodology, the one that gives 5 weights to the items I mentioned, is the ABAG methodology. So despite the fact that CCAG created this local process and we may yet see some trades among jurisdictions, essentially they've come around to be proposing to use the same methodology in essence that SCAG is using for the other 8 counties in the jurisdiction. The last 2 factors that I mentioned were growth near transit and household growth near transit and job growth near transit received some discussion in that some jurisdictions aren't located on main travel corridors, and therefore they didn't feel that that should be included. But nonetheless, at the end of the last of the TAC meetings, there was near unanimous support for the what's called the ABAG methodology, and it's the 4th column in that chart. Additional sources of information on the distribution, past performance of other jurisdictions is available in ABAG reports that the council may have seen previously. One is called the Bay Area Housing Profile, and another is called A Place to Call Home. And those reports show that a number of housing units built in Brisbane is still lower than most other cities, although the smaller, more affluent cities like Atherton and Hillsborough, many of these units might be second dwelling units. That is second dwelling units, not the primary dwelling unit on a property, but you get credit towards housing provided for second dwelling units. One problem appears to be has led to a higher regional housing need for the city, appears to be in the found in the rather high build-out intensity standards in the floor area ratio for the trade commercial land use designation in the city general plan. When it was adopted in '94, as I'll mention in a few minutes, or show a slide in a few minutes of some comparison with other jurisdictions, but there's an unusually high floor area ratio in the trade commercial intensity standard. That gets factored into the build-out when you say how many acres do you have trade commercial and multiply it by the floor area ratio for the build-out. If you note in the in the ABAG methodology, the job growth represents 22.5% of that methodology. So in generating the regional housing needs number, jobs growth is a factor that's taken into consideration, and due to the fact that the city has a unusually high floor area ratio for trade commercial, it kind of pumps up that number. And I'll talk about that a little bit further as we go into the land use element portion of the meeting. I just wanted to bring that up here in conjunction with the methodologies that were used to come up with the regional housing needs assessment number. I don't know if at this point the council has questions about that part of the feedback that you asked staff to give you at the last meeting.
Are there any questions?
Well, yeah. I mean, I understand the methodology on it, you know, and don't necessarily agree with it, you know, and it doesn't look like there's really anything we can do about it other than write a letter or something like that. I mean, not go through an appeal process, but, I mean, there's some, it's taken like trying to make it a simplistic formula. It's very complicated, you know, especially with what we're dealing with in Brisbane. I mean, in particular with the jobs growth potential. But we also have some developments that are going around us that aren't providing jobs, and they're providing a heck of a lot of housing. And, you know, there's a real misbalance there. So it's not taken into consideration, I don't think, of the regional aspect. And I think that's probably a really missing piece of the pie, because we're doing this for 7 years, and 7 years down the line, we may not have anything done yet, and yet we may have 60 more or 100 more houses built, and they're going to pile another number on us. And it seems to me like we're reactive to that number. You know what I mean? Is to find, okay, let's see what we can do to try and meet it. And it just seemed the whole formula to me is not realistic. And one of the things that's not taken into consideration too is the current city size. Brisbane's small for a reason. You know, I mean, not only square miles, things like that, but Brisbane also chose to stay a small city, where other cities chose to have more massive growth, you know, in housing and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's just, you know, so
Through the chair, response to Councilmember Conway. You know, I agree with you that this is a kind of a blunt instrument to distribute the housing needs. And for instance, the trades that are possible between jurisdictions,
Into the microphone, please.
the trades that are talked about, that could be one city could take some share of your regional housing needs assessment in return for some benefit that's yet undetermined. In the law, it really doesn't discuss trades between counties.
yeah.
Cities within counties, but in this case, we're sitting next to a rather large county with a large potential housing production, as you mentioned, and that I don't think there's a process for discussing trades across county boundaries.
And I guess that's my part, is perhaps, you know, we should, you know, given our particular situation that it brings this up, that, you know, we really should kind of at least let ABAG know that, hey, this isn't such a, you know, pure process, that, you know, you need to look at things like that also. That, you know, you have one section, one particular area that's providing a whole lot of housing, but no jobs to go with it, where, you know, we may be providing jobs to go with that housing. And so, you know, there needs to be that balance too, not look at, okay, well, we're putting the onus on you because this is what you're going to provide, and therefore provide it all. And and I guess I'm putting that out to the council, and maybe, not from an appeal point of view, but just from an informative point of view to ABAG. Is
Other council members?
Yeah, I have a question.
Si?
Bill, you talked about this, about initially ABAG was the one that was providing us the numbers and we had to live with those basically. Now the state law allows us to form regional groups. And I understand we formed that group, and in the regional group we'll kind of allocate whatever it is, not necessarily the city gets, a lot from ABAG and that's it. And yet I read in this that there's some hesitation about this, and I'm not really sure where are we really going with this. Where are the other agencies going with it? Are we going with the ABAG numbers, which seem to be as good as the regional groups? And, there seems to be some conflict going on here. And I'm curious, where are we?
Through the chair. Just to say that staff had some reservations about this local process, split away from ABAG and done through CCAG for the county and the 20 jurisdictions in the county. We had some reservation as to whether it would result in a tremendous investment of time with essentially no difference in the outcome. It seems to be drifting in that direction. And as I mentioned in the staff report, the only, at this point, if it ends up being the same methodology that ABAG is using, we could have just got the numbers from ABAG. The benefit of the local process, I think, was that it was seen as a more positive environment for the possibility of trades between cities. Although staff had some reservations as to who would want to take someone else's housing need assessment numbers or portions thereof, and what the trade would be for. So we're at this point, the jury's still out, so to speak, to see if anything comes of the local process that is a greater benefit than would have had come if it had just stayed with ABAG. But right now, it's the process is not finished. The numbers will be settled on, and we'll report back to you on that in the coming weeks.
At this point, do you have any recommendation for action to be taken by the council?
The council essentially wanted staff to come back with an explanation of the methodology. We hope we've done that.
I'm moving on to the next question. Are you prepared to make a recommendation, or is that to come later?
That would come later, although I would observe that, and as I said in the staff report, of the methodologies looked at, this one had the lowest number for the city, not counting the first methodology, which kind of nobody supported very much, that it be based 100% on housing growth. So of the three methodologies, other methodologies shown there in the chart, the lowest number for Brisbane was the 469 number. So
Thank you.
TAC level, we supported the lowest
Any
number.
other questions?
I just-
Except, Si?
Just thank you very much for mentioning trades. That was my other question. And I wasn't really sure how all that works. If somebody took my housing allotment, a portion of it, what would I get, what's the trade? You don't know that yet, then?
Actually, I sit on the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Political Advisory Committee, and yeah, that is unknown. The process is still underway. We are just now, I guess, this month going to get the California allotment of houses for San Mateo County. We don't have that number yet. Once that happens, cities, jurisdictions are free to try and do some horse trading for, who knows, transportation funds. People have suggested maybe water rights can be traded between cities for housing. There is no limit. Nobody knows what that's going to look like. It is the great unknown. We haven't worked it out yet, and we still have some months to start trying to figure out if trades are even feasible. And it may not, and it may be that we would end up with the ABAG numbers, and we go through the same process we've gone through in every other previous cycle.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Seppi?
Yeah, I just wanted to Michael answered what I was going to even make a comment. I serve on the ABAG board, and when San Mateo County cities decided to work together, they're watching, and if it's successful, it could be a role model for other areas. So there's a watch from ABAG on this process, too.
Are there any other questions or comments on this matter?
Well, I had brought up about writing a letter. Do you think that's premature at this time, or should we wait for the process to get further along to perhaps write a letter to ABAG? And, you know, because I mean, I personally think that further consideration should become like city size, you know, your square miles and stuff like that be incorporated in it.
I sense the city manager might have a comment.
Well, not specifically on that, so I don't know, maybe it's better for the council.
I sensed incorrectly.
Yeah, there's a point I want to make, but I'll make it after you have your discussion.
Yeah, I would be concerned about writing a letter at this point to Abe, because I think that, you know, all 20 jurisdictions, all 20 cities in the county, I think, are not so happy with the numbers they get from the state of California. I don't think anybody wants to grow in San Mateo County, that I can tell anyway from having sat in these political advisory committee sessions. And then the other aspect of it is that my feeling is that the ABAG probably feels that there is an existing housing need that the projects you're referring to are addressing, and that those projects are addressing an existing pent-up demand for housing, and that it's a different thing to create more need for housing by creating more jobs.
Right. Okay. So then, does the rest of council feel that way, perhaps premature, write a letter yet? I mean, because I'm getting that sense too, that maybe we should go through the process too with the rest of the cities in the county.
My own sense is that it would be premature.
Okay.
And Brisbane historically is not very good about accepting someone else's dictates on most any subject. I suspect that'll be
I
still the
certainly
case.
Okay.
Are we finished with this item now?
I was just going to address one of the issues that Clark brought up, and that was this idea of looking at this from county to county. And I have had discussions with the executive director of CK about that aspect of this. And basically, I think his response at this point is that, you know, we got to learn to crawl before we can walk. And this process we're going through within the county, we need to show that that's going to have some success before we start trying to look from county to county. Because I did bring up to him the point that you're making, is that we have really kind of more of a regional connection between what's happening in San Francisco County and northern San Mateo County than maybe we would with looking at the southern part of the county. So that there might be some value in being able to do that in the future. But we also need to understand that housing advocates in California are very leery of any of these types of things, and so it's going to be an uphill battle.
Well, we've had uphill battles before.
Doesn't mean it's not meritorious.
Anything else on this item? All right, our next item on the agenda is to discuss land use in the central Brisbane sub-area. I have a suspicion that there are people here who would like to address this subject, and that given the age of some of the attendants, we had probably better do that before we have the staff report on this subject. Do I sense that there are folks who would like to address the council? Hands up, please.
What?
All right, let's start right here in the front, and I'll work to the back. Cliff? And then when you come up, please give us your name and your address. Is this not particularly about kids' issues?
Well, it's more about what is on tonight's agenda, and I think a lot of the people that are here tonight are discussing what's on tonight's agenda regarding the land use in Central Brisbane.
Start.
Okay. All right. So, well, tonight before you have recommendations from the staff and from the Planning Commission regarding the Central Brisbane sub-area of the land use element. Right.
Your name.
So, Cliff Lentz, 611 Humboldt Road.
Thank you.
And as you all are aware, I mean, our current general plan is extremely thorough and has provided us with excellent guidance over the past 13 years. But, just as we were all younger once and probably a little wilder, over time we've matured and, we've become more focused on the things that really matter in our lives. I'm just looking at the goals of the council, and goal number 8, it says to preserve the unique current character of Brisbane. And I read that and I say, well, what's the current character? Is the current character different than the character from 1994 when we first created the general plan? Is the character different, say, 30 years ago or 50 years ago? And, I feel that character evolves over time. I've been here for almost 18 years, and I've seen some good things come about over that time. Though living in Brisbane for 18 years, a lot of people might consider me a newcomer. But things like the pool, the park, the teen center, having a permanent city hall. I mean, those are things that I feel have contributed to making Brisbane a better place to be. And I don't think that any of those changes have harmed our small town character. In fact, I think, if you have character, true character, it doesn't matter, if changes come, as long as they're within, what you feel is appropriate for your community. I think communities that don't have the strength, that are scared about change. Sometimes people move away, or they put up barriers, and those communities die. And I'm glad that we're not that type of community. A year and a half ago, we had an opportunity to define our community when we participated in the placemaking workshops. And, during that time, we discussed community character, as well as identifying areas that we're proud of and areas that could be better. And some of the things that came up were revitalizing the downtown, improving the community park, and looking at opportunities to enhance public amenities, such as a new library, new community center, and building a high school. And, when the Planning Commission was addressing this part of the general plan, we were looking at that placemaking workshop involvement from the community. The changes that are in this matrix don't really come from the community, come from the Planning Commission, but rather from the council, from the community that came about from that workshop. I have a letter from someone. Actually, before I just read this letter, I have 21 people here on this list who are interested in creating some kind of high school, perhaps a public charter high school. I've done some research, and these high schools don't have to be that big. They could be 100 students, 150 students. Some of that is appropriate. Some of that's more, in line with what Brisbane is, that small town. In this letter, the person wrote that, as you know, this is a big question for every family in Brisbane. The options are limited. This is talking about what you do after middle school, and causes some people to consider leaving town by the time their children reach high school age, or spending what's needed to send them to private school. I think, right now, updating this general plan, we have an obligation and opportunity to really define our small town character and put together a really smart plan that helps us achieve our goals, those public amenity goals. And as you go through that matrix, I hope that you find, the areas that the Planning Commission were looking at and trying to funnel the public's vision into the general plan. There are a couple of things that in that matrix that I hope that you take a look at as far as perhaps adding to the general plan. It's policy 262.1, and I really like your number one goal, and that is to design infrastructure and public facilities to be as efficient, cost-effective, and to contribute to the cohesion and character of the community. And as a program to that, I hope that it says actively identify a site and a plan for a new community center, library, and public charter school in central Brisbane. In another program, 262.1b, explore the possibilities of expanding the community park, provide greater opportunities for families and individuals to interact with their park. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there others in the audience, perhaps others with kids, who would like to speak? And why don't you tell us both who you are and who you have with you?
I'm Carrie McCallum, or Carrie Bruff, and this is my choking and here, take him sorry, just choking on an apple.
I've got 4 kids, I've been there.
We'll hide this under here. I'm Carrie Bruff, thank you. And I have 4 children, as you see. Alden is 6, Ellie is 4, and Heathy is 2.5. And that's Quinn, and he is 8 months old. Probably shouldn't have an apple yet. Oh, Dan, just leave that. Leave me alone, Dan. I'm here to support the idea of a high school.
Please speak into the mic so TV picks you up.
Okay, excellent. We're currently considering selling our house and moving out of town because of our high school options. And it seems like far off for us, but we have to start making a plan because I want my children to be in a stable place and move forward with their friends as they go through the school system. I think Brisbane is a unique community, and I would really like to stay here, and I urge you to consider the idea of a high school here. I know there are people that consider it too small of a place. It would be keeping our children in a bubble. They wouldn't be going out and experiencing the real world, and I really don't agree with that at all. I think everybody's in their own little bubble. People in Burlingame have a great high school to go to, and that's their bubble. Daly City has a high school. We have 4 choices. Nothing here, 2 hours. The kids commute to Pacifica, and that's an option, but it's not the option I would choose for my children. I would choose to send them to a high school here if I could. Private school, obviously, would not be an option. So I really urge you to consider a high school here.
Thank you very much. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Jenny Williams, and I live at 132 Warbler in Brisbane. I think this is really an important issue that we need to take notice of. I've lived here all my life, which I'm not going to reveal my age exactly, but it's an ongoing problem that we have every generation. My grandmother had the problem of not having high school, so she went to Balboa. My mother went to Jefferson, and I had no choice really but to kind of finagle my way around because I didn't want to go to Jefferson. I wanted, not that Jefferson's such a bad place, but I wanted to go to some place closer where my friends were going, which was El Camino in South City, and had to make up an address to even go there. So it's an ongoing issue, I think, that we have always dealt with in Brisbane, and I think that we should start taking notice that every generation is affected all the time, you know. So I too am also considering moving out of Brisbane because there's no high school for my children. I have 3 children. So I think that I'd like council to take a look at it very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another parent who wishes to speak? Please.
I am also,
Your name
I'm
first, please?
sorry, Renee Schaefer, 316 Monterey Street. I am for looking into a high school here in Brisbane because right now our options would be public school or private school, and honestly, I would probably refinance my house to just send them to private school. I would never, I myself went to private school. My mom did what she could as a single mom, but I want the same for my kids. And I think if you looked into a high school, you would get a strong community backing of it because there's quite a few kids here. And I think they'd be very supportive of it, and you'd get a lot of help from the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dan, you know the drill.
Hi, Dan Sorrentino, 574 Alvarado. This is my daughter Rita. And we went to Silver Spot, and at Silver Spot, there was people from Brisbane, people from outside of Brisbane that came to school there because it was such a nice community, because they wanted the sense of camaraderie that we have in Brisbane. There are people now going to Brisbane Elementary, my daughter's one, and we have friends that went to school with us at Silver Spot, and they can't go to Brisbane Elementary because they don't live in Brisbane. They're selling their house to move to Brisbane so they can go to school in Brisbane with the other children here because of this community. And I think the same thing would happen if we had a high school here. People will come to Brisbane. They'll bring their kids here. They'll come here to support the school. I don't think there will be a problem with having enough children in Brisbane to support a high school, and we would like to have one too. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I see others who wish to speak? Please.
Hi, my name is Lorraine Hemingway, and my son is at Silver Spot Cooperative Nursery, along with Dan, and I think it's been an amazing experience for the community factor and how involved the parents are there and how interested they are in their children's education, in the community. And the biggest issue I have before me is I'm going to look to purchase a home within the next 2 years, and I would hate to move from Brisbane because it's great. You know, so many concerns are nil here because the community is just so comfortable and laid back, and I don't know, it's great. And but also community-minded. And so if we had a high school, I think we'd just make this part of the Bay Area just that much better. I mean, and I think there would be so many kids. If it was only open to Brisbane, I think, you know, if we're worried about having students attend, we wouldn't have any problem finding people from around the peninsula or the city come in and attend a high school that we opened here, because we've had no trouble at Silver Spot. We prioritize everyone from Brisbane, but we've had so many people come out who are so sad that they can't continue on to Brisbane Elementary. So the high school, yes, please. That would make my decision-making so much easier. And a new library would be a dream come true.
And that's all you want, right?
That's it.
Any other parents? Going once? The staff report's going to come next, so.
Hello, my name is Arlene Stuckey. Address is 30 Mono Street. And I am just here to lend my support to a high school in Brisbane. I know it's a daunting task to start a new school, especially in this community, but I think given all the people here and the people I know who would support a new school here in town, I think it's a very doable task. So I just urge you to consider it. Thank you.
There was, Dan, there was someone else who was going to...
Hi, my name is Richard Cutler, 332 Monterey Street. I'm a Brisbane resident. I have 2 children in Brisbane Elementary, and my wife is involved in BEST as a treasurer of the PTO. And one of the only negative aspects that we feel about Brisbane is the lack of a high school. So the idea of getting a high school started and having a high school in town is a very positive thing. And I think knowing the parents of a number of children in Brisbane, they have a very can-do attitude. So there are a number of parents that would want to get involved. So I just want to state my enthusiasm for having a high school in Brisbane. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Dan.
I just want to encourage, Dan Sorrentino, 574 Alvarado. I just want to encourage you to make sure you know where Cy lives before deciding to put a new high school in town.
Eminent domain. The eminent Eldorado Street, eminent domain.
Ain't gonna happen.
Please, name, rank, and serial number.
Hi, my name is Danielle Kelstead, and I live at 516 Alvarado Street, and I wanted to state how privileged we are to live in Brisbane and to have this community and the elementary school and Lipman, and it would be just wonderful to have a high school. Having to ship our children to Pacifica or wherever else is just not good enough an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. There's one more.
I think the one in the back coat.
Please.
Hi, Rosanna Wagner, 231 San Benito Road, and I just want to express that my husband and I would both support a high school in Brisbane, as I have 3 students, 2 in the elementary and 1 in middle school, and my daughter here, we're looking at, she's in 7th grade, and you know, in the next, we're already thinking about high schools, but right now we're looking at you know, outer district, because we're not satisfied with the schools that they have to choose from in our district, the Jefferson district, or private school. So, and my daughter's also looking into, she's doing a project on the Baylands, and that's one of the things that she herself is interested in and seeing in Brisbane as a high school. I don't know if she would like to say anything, but okay. Well, thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just, see, it's going to be hard for me I can't give you the legal context of what you would have to do to start a charter school, and that's one of the things that you have to look into. 15 years ago or more, when I had under 4, the subject interested me greatly as well. And at the time, charter schools were not an option. And we ended up staying in Brisbane and supporting all the private schools in the area. Now we're supporting all the colleges, but
out of the area.
all over the place. So what I would, and I'll ask staff to comment, but what I would encourage you to do is get a group of people together, figure out exactly what the charter school process is, what participation you have to have from the local school districts, and ask yourself the question whether these requirements are something that a group of people in Brisbane has the possibility of meeting. I suspect that the council would be more than happy to help, but it can't be the driver going there. Now, if somebody can prove me wrong, that's fine. Staff, any particular comment?
Well, I think your points are on point. I've watched this process a little bit from afar in some other communities. I do believe that the process basically starts with a community group and the school district itself. And, all the nuances and the laws that go along with that I'm unfamiliar with, but I do believe that's basically the process that would need to take place. I don't know, city attorney's got any? Okay.
Yeah. Seppi?
Yes. It is great to see all of you here. Back in 1995, when I was running for city council, people had asked about high school. So I started checking into it, and there were 7 elements that we had to meet. One of the elements was that it would not have any negative impact at Jefferson High School. So if you start our own high school at that time, it would have definitely impacted the Jefferson, and would have been very difficult to meet all the 7. As Steve said, yes, now charter school has become very popular. Those are the things that I do. I work with schools, I work with education, and I think there's a timing for everything. And there's a saying that if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to get what you've been getting. So if we don't do anything, we're going to not have anything. So I think the timing is really now, and I'll be more than happy to help you to get the resources and do whatever I can to help, because that's my work. Thanks.
Clerk?
No, I don't have anything to say.
Anybody
I
else?
just saw what you went through years ago,
Yes.
Steve, so from experience.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I just had a question. Does anybody know what charter high school, I know you got to have a specific charter, and then that is, what, learning like the arts or mathematics or English?
I'm venturing on thin ice here, but I don't think it has to be specific to a particular kind of education. And that's as far as I'm comfortable going. Si?
Yeah, I know when my kids were raised in town, they both went to BS, Lippman, and then graduated from Jefferson. I wish we did have a local high school that would make it so much easier for them, but nevertheless, they had to commute over that hill every day, back and forth, so I share your concerns. I think I would love to see a high school here, but as the mayor pointed out, we'll do the best we can, but...
Can we open up the
Please.
discussion here, or is that not?
Please come up to the mic.
Oh, okay, so never mind.
And just to answer that question, it may be appropriate that at a later date, we specifically agendize and discuss this matter. We have a land use element that we've got to get through, or supposedly going to get through tonight. So I suppose we can discuss whether a formal agenda item, just to give you substantive feedback as to what would have to happen, would be appropriate or not. But I know that the place to start is to get your group together and to talk with the school district as a beginning point. I think you'll find us receptive to the extent that we can be.
And I think tonight, the reason why you're all here is that we're discussing a location that you would like to see a high school planned for, or land set aside for that type of use in the central Brisbane sub-area. So that's something that we can consider.
We can discuss that,
tonight.
yes.
All right. And I have, as you know, I have a son, and I'm interested in finding a high school for him too. So if you do form a group, give me an email.
It sounds like we have 2 volunteers on the council here.
And that's all we can have. With that, we're going to go on into a staff report and talk about general stuff relating to the land use element. And I suspect, to give us all a moment of grace, those who would like to gracefully depart, this would be a good time.
What other uses were you interested in?
Are we going to take 5 minutes?
Let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll get you.
Well, I gotta go.
I'll just get your...
Say one thing, just that I was supportive of this. My name's Nancy Sorrentino, and I have a 6-year-old, Rita, and I'm supportive of keeping a space that's central to Brisbane for the school, library, and community center. I think that is very important to keep and not end up putting it way out in the Baylands or some other place. I'd like to keep it in the community. That's what my input in that for the land use part.
All right.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
We're going to take 5 minutes now.
Sorry about that. I knew she wanted to.
Hey,
Wait.
I'd rather get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I wrote them down.
You know, I didn't go through it. It always seemed...
and the lack of progress on the agendized material, I hope you'll be briefer than last week.
Summarize the staff report. At your last meeting, which was the general meeting on the opening up of the land use element of the general plan, you discussed some, the staff discussed some planning strategies like smart growth, new urbanism, mixed use, transit-oriented development. These strategies advocate a certain pattern and mix of land use that reduces vehicle miles traveled, which is directly related to air pollution, greenhouse gases, and global warming. The strategies reject the auto-dependent suburban sprawl pattern of recent past history. Staff and the Planning Commission's recommendations reflect a recognition and incorporation of these strategies in the land use plan. In light of the climate change issue, which you discussed in the health and safety element and the conservation element, staff has recommended the review of the land use element, that the review of the element presents an opportunity to look at the current mix of land uses to see if changes could be made that would provide housing in closer proximity to other uses to increase walking, bicycling, and to reduce vehicle miles traveled by the automobile. Central Brisbane, brief overview where we left off, some numbers to keep in mind. We talked about them last time. We talked a little bit about the Rayner Regional Housing Needs Assessment number at the beginning of the meeting. The Government Code, Section 65302A, requires that the land use element include a statement of the standards of population, density, and building intensity recommended for the various districts and other territory covered by the plan. So each land use designation needs to have an associated population intensity, density, and building intensity to it. This is just kind of a review summary of the intensity standards for the, other than Central Brisbane, for the non-residential areas in the plan in the Sierra Point, commercial retail office, Southeast Bayshore, Southwest Bayshore, the Quarry, so forth. The other 12, the other sub-areas that have non-residential development potential in them, and what the floor area ratio is in the right-hand column. You notice that at the top, Sierra Point has a 4.8 FAR, and the Baylands has a range. In the south, it's 2.4. In the northern portion, it's 5.8 floor area ratio. So if you think of an acre as having a single-story building that covers the whole acre, you would be at 1.0. If you cut the building in half, and build up on a two-story building, then you can increase the floor area ratio as you go up correspondingly. In comparison, what's interesting and has to do with our previous discussion on the regional housing needs assessment is that one of the components in that assessment that ABAG certainly used was employment growth. And they look at the general plans of the member jurisdictions and the build-out projections, which are the floor area ratio for non-residential times the amount of acreage, in effect, that you have, to arrive at an employment-generating result, which is, I think it counted as 45%, no, 22.5% of the regional housing needs assessment was based on that using the ABAG methodology. So if you just a quick comparison that I did with a couple of adjacent jurisdictions or close jurisdictions, South San Francisco and San Bruno, in the neighborhood commercial, the first column there, ours would be, this is approximately, sometimes there are a range, 2.4 floor area ratio for the neighborhood commercial land use designation, which has a couple of zones associated with which we'll talk about in relation to Central Brisbane. But you can see that Brisbane has an unusually high floor area ratios in comparison to two other general plans. For neighborhood commercial, that's the NC. RC is regional commercial. So in our regional commercial, it's in trying to compare Brisbane's land use designations with South San Francisco and San Bruno, there's, a general proximity. You look at what they call the designation, and it might be something different than what we call it. But for neighborhood commercial versus regional commercial versus industrial versus office, you can see that across the board, for the most part, Brisbane's floor area ratios are considerably higher than they are in the general plans of these two other cities, and I think that would be borne out across a number of jurisdictions. So given that the largest sub-area in the city by far is the Baylands, it's trade commercial with a 4.8 for the northern half above the river park, you can see how that played into the employment growth figure, which plays into the regional housing needs assessment. So as we go through the land use element and balance it out in the end and look at the recommended changes and so forth, one of the things the council might want to consider is whether those floor area ratios should be that high. The other two jurisdictions' general plans were done by Diet Bhatia, the same consultants that are doing the Baylands specific plan alternative scenario that was facilitated the workshop we had last Saturday. And they mentioned that in passing, when they had looked at our general plan as far as bidding on the contract, it said that the number looked unusually high, and the same proposed square footage of development proposed in the Bayland specific plan could be done on a much could be achieved on a much smaller acreage, which is, a way for the city to reduce its regional housing needs assessment number in the future. I don't know whether we can backtrack, or certainly if we wrote a letter, as Councilmember Conway was suggesting, at some time in the future, we might want to mention that, our floor area ratios were unusually large. I think they must have been styled based on Sierra Points, which had a development agreement and a master plan for a rather healthy floor area ratio, and I think the Baylands might have been compared with Sierra Point, and so that number was adopted. But it's a number that doesn't necessarily have to be that large. So,
but this doesn't really have much to do with Central Brisbane.
No, it doesn't, but it does in that we're going to look at the land use designations in Central Brisbane. We'll be looking at floor area ratio. Granted that even if you look in the Central Brisbane, you will find that the floor area ratios are probably a little bit on the high side as well. But you're right, mostly it's in the trade commercial sub-areas. There's 4 designations of land use in the general plan that affect the Central Brisbane area: neighborhood commercial, retail office, residential, single family and multifamily, public facilities and parks, and some open spaces identified. In the neighborhood commercial retail office land use designation, it's a density of 1.66 to 3.22 employees per 1,000 square feet and a floor area ratio of 2.4. The description of it in the general plan is that the land use designation neighborhood commercial retail office is a range of local retail and service uses, including shops, restaurants, medical and professional and administrative offices, public and semi-public uses. Residential is conditional by use permit. So it's not in the NCRO, residential requires a use permit. There's 2 zones, one that affects Brisbane Village, that's NCRO 1, the shopping center, and one that affects downtown, primarily either side of Visitation and the first block up San Bruno. The type of uses allowed are listed there: financial, medical, personal services, so forth. In the NCRO 1, those uses: bars, educational facilities, health and fitness, church, veterinarian clinics, daycares, out sales. It does say educational facilities, note, in the NCRO2, that's the Brisbane Village. So by conditional use, that's the CU means in those zones, you need a conditional use for the bars, education, health and fitness, church, and so forth. And the NCR2 that applies to the Main Street, in effect, is the same, except that residential in that zone can only be when accompanied as a mixed use, above and behind the store, so to speak, on Main Street. The residential land use designation includes single-family and multifamily in central Brisbane, with densities ranging for the R1 and the R2 of 2.5 to 14 units per acre, and in the R3 zone, 15 to 30 units per acre. Those are the two zones that apply to that land use designation. The residential zoning, approximately R1, R2, R3 distribution of the acreage of those three zones. 91.5 in the R1 with about 905 dwelling units. This is in the central Brisbane sub-area. 7.5 acres or 99 dwelling units in the R2, and about 214 dwelling units on 9.7 acres in the R3. Total of about 1,218. The census had a total of 1,831 total units at that time, and if most of the 60 that we added over the last housing period went into there, you can see that central Brisbane has the core of the housing, 2/3 or more of the housing in the city located in central Brisbane. I wanted to stop right there with this PowerPoint presentation. So there are a number of attachments to the staff report, including a land use, general plan land use diagram for the whole city, a zoning map for the whole city, just so you can have that for use during the whole process of the land use element. Then there was one that focused in on the central Brisbane sub-area land use diagram, showing the different land use designations, NCRO, and the residential at different density. There was a central Brisbane zoning summary chart of development regulations, just giving you a quick summary hit of these development standards in the various zones that affect central Brisbane. Summary of conditions, just uses that are established along Main Street visitation. And then central Brisbane land use summary. This one has most of the information that I just gave you in PowerPoint as kind of an inventory of the land, the parcels, and what they're zoned at, and how many acres, and how many residential uses or square footage of non-residential are there. So in addition to going over the programs and policies for the central Brisbane sub-area from the land use element, which is in the matrix, we're asking that the council consider a general plan amendment and rezone in the village area relative to the California Teachers Retirement System's property, which is immediately and contiguous to the shopping center to the northwest, which consists of a little over 4 acres that right now is in Crocker Park. It's kind of this is the edge of Crocker Park coming down into the village, has some existing trade, commercial, warehousing, industrial facilities. Crocker Park does in general. As you come down to this area, the State Teachers Retirement System parcel has a large amount of open space in between the village shopping center and the manufacturing warehousing building that's on that parcel. But in total, it's just slightly over 4 acres of developable area. 2 other parcels that could be considered as being on that across the street, in effect, from the community center and with the park, are the 2 industrial buildings, industrial office buildings across the street from City Hall on Park Place, the two in between the state teachers and the skateboard park, in effect. And
These are
so,
marked A and B
yes,
on the diagram?
correct. So we get A, B, and C. The A is approximately an acre and a quarter, and B is an acre and a tenth. They could be included in a general plan amendment rezone of that area. The Planning Commission and the staff looked at it, and this also did evolve out of the Fred Kent placemaking study workshop that was done in the report that was in your packet, which is the report from the Project for Public Spaces, which is placemaking, Fred Kent's company. And as you know, that workshop broke out into groups, and certain groups went to certain areas, primarily in the central Brisbane area, and they looked at this site, and there was a concept diagram that came out of the breakout group that looked at this area, proposing a more bold vision, if you will, of a civic center in this area, and it would require realigning Old County Road and changing the park in the process. What staff and Planning Commission have come up with, we've taken the basic idea there about enhancing the village, and then taking the planning concepts, which we discussed with you at the last meeting about mixing uses and new urbanism and smart growth, and looked at these parcels as an opportunity to enhance the density around the central core of the city and create that walkable, transit-friendly completion, if you will, of a vision of the village. Now, so staff is asking you to consider that, discuss it tonight as a possibility. I think as we go through the land use element, other sites will be looked at in the other sub-areas that are possible sites for mixed use or housing as well. But this one came out of the Fred Kent workshop and seemed to make a lot of sense in relationship to those smart growth planning concepts. We have another site on that was in the staff report. However, the Planning Commission really didn't get to a discussion of it at their last meeting, so we're not carrying a Planning Commission recommendation on that, other than we did put it in the staff report anticipating that we would have had time to discuss it at the Planning Commission. So that you're aware of it is a over 7 acre site across Bayshore Boulevard. It's also attached to your staff report and shown in the aerial as a 7.3 acre site in between the fire station and Ice House Hill that is in the Baylands sub-area. But the idea would be if it is also, there's concerns for remediation of that site. So we're not we're not really asking, other than to be aware that we're looking at it and we're still discussing it, or will be discussing it at the Planning Commission. We just did want to bring it to the council's attention. Obviously, there's concerns in the Baylands sub-area for contamination, and we're only looking at that site as a possibility should it be proven to just happen to be in the Baylands because it's part of one ownership under Universal Paragon, but it's not part of the contaminated area. On the maps of OU1 and OU2, it's in the general area of OU2, but it's not in the area shown in the remediation peer review studies to contain any of the plume of contamination on OU2. It's southerly of that. And we're just looking at that primarily because it's close to the village. It's on Bayshore Boulevard, which again gives it this strong transit connection. And we're we don't even have carried forth a recommendation for the Planning Commission on the use, other than to look at it as a possible mixed use because it's there with that transit connection and connection to the village. We're most interested, though, in the council slots on the former site with the state teachers retirement system and possibly the other 2 parcels there on Park Place as a possible general plan amendment out of Crocker Park Trade Commercial and into either the SCRO 2, which requires the use permit for housing, or preferably removing that, a mixed use with an emphasis on the housing end of it, looking at a density in the R3 range of 20 units per acre in the mix. We expect that there could be net out all the streets and the public improvements and the public concept of connecting that using that property as a connection to the city hall and the community park and so forth. There'd be a certain desire to get a nice public amenity as well in conjunction with any development of that property. So we're looking for council discussion on the advisability of that recommendation.
Are you focusing now on the building that is labeled with a C on this map?
That's correct, with the caveat that that could be extended to the other 2 parcels as well. A and B.
You also have a D in here, but that's the post office.
D is the post office, and any sites that have existing buildings on them that are trade commercial, if they were changed to a different land use, such as a mixed use with a residential emphasis, those buildings would become legal non-conforming. In other words, they'd be able to continue in their use for the until such time as the owners of the property desired to change them to the use that they had been rezoned to. So there'd be no downside other than when you become non-conforming, expansions of an existing existing non-conformity is an issue and becomes a constraint on the property expanding under its old use. So that is you know, when you rezone, when you change a property to another zone, if it has an existing building and use, that becomes non-conforming. It's allowed to continue, but expansions of the non-conforming use are constrained.
So does the State Teacher Association, Bill, own that parcel B, the one you have here marked letter B?
No, that is not owned by the state teachers. The state teachers retirement system owns parcel C.
See, the vacant lot. Yeah.
One of the reasons that we put the other parcels up for discussion, including the post office, was that it creates a strong connection to the residential community across from the beginning of senior center and so forth across from the post office. So you have a continuum of residential use possible in the future. But that is again going from the smart growth kind of mixed use transit-friendly community, it would allow a considerable amount of future housing to be put in central Brisbane and satisfy the housing requirements, whatever they are, in the future in a central location rather than a more dispersed location like some of the other sub-areas in the city.
So by changing this, you could adversely impact the property owners, right?
To the extent that they would be, it would be difficult for them to expand the square footage of the existing non-conforming use, yes.
So if the existing non-conforming use was to leave, would they be able to rent this to another Non-conforming use?
Yes, they would. The city attorney can comment if he cares to on this. Usually, there's a period of time of vacation at which time you lose your non-conforming status. But for the most part, subsequent other users of the building and the same use that have been going on can continue into the future.
Well, actually, our ordinance does not contain an amortization provision, so whether it's residential or commercial, there's no requirement that the non-conforming use be phased out. That could be added in as part of the zoning regulations, but we've never had that so far. So if it is a legally established non-conforming use, it can be allowed to continue. As Bill says, it's not expanded, but there's no requirement that it be eliminated. I'd also point out that if you were changing that zoning to residential, at least my understanding of today's market is you'd be significantly increasing the property value of that parcel.
Probably true.
Now, in the interest of moving forward, you've also given us an attachment K, which is a series of suggested changes to the current general plan.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, and you can do that in any order that the council desires. You can put the discussion of the rezonings off till after you go through that, which might be the better way to go, so you get the framework of the policies and programs and see how those rezonings may fit or not that direction.
Council discussion as to how we proceed?
Sounds like a good idea to get through attachment K first.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
Hearing no objection and being of that mind myself, turning to attachment K. Any suggestions for changes on the first page? Councilmember Barnes.
On policy 250, the current language is consider ways to enhance the commercial area to promote successful small business. I assume the intent of this is actually to provide conditions that increase the likelihood of success for small businesses.
I suspect that's correct.
And so that's the language I would suggest changing this to. And I can provide the language that I just read off of this after the meeting.
Is that, heads are nodding.
All right. And I wrote a new policy for this page, although it may fit elsewhere as well. And this has to do with the character of small-town Brisbane. And so what I wrote was preserve and enhance the small-town character of central Brisbane by maintaining a balance of locally owned independent retail and state or national chain or formula retail. And then a program under that would be to define the chain and formula retail.
Reactions?
Say that again.
Okay. Preserve and enhance the small-town character of central Brisbane by maintaining a balance of locally owned, independent retail and state or national formula chain retail. Then a program under that would be to define the chain and formula retail.
And is that in reaction to, I guess, the recent discussion we had?
Yeah, to keep chains from moving in and displacing local businesses.
Does that do it?
Comments?
I'm not quite sure what you're saying, so you're asking to have a balance between the two of them?
Right.
Means we allow a formula store to balance the independent stores we have?
Well, I think in the ordinance that we were kind of discussing was that we would do that on a use permit basis, that if a formula store made an application, the community could decide if that changed the character of that retail community in such a way that it no longer seemed like Brisbane. And this just puts it in the general plan that the goal of any ordinance is to preserve and enhance the small town character of our commercial district by maintaining a balance between the chain stores that we already have, like, Curves could be a chain store, Subway is a chain store, and the local homegrown businesses that we have, like the coffee shop and the hardware store.
I don't know, it almost sounds like it, like opening the door for them to come. That's kind of why, I don't know. Maybe that's not your intent, but.
No, that's not my intent, but my intent is to make it legal, too.
Make what legal?
Any sort of ordinance that would give us control over national chains. Because we have to do that based on maintaining the character of our community. And a good legal strategy is to say that it's a balance. Although the city attorney, I'm sure, can put this in much clearer legal terms.
Would the city attorney care to comment?
You could say define and regulate formulas.
Okay.
I mean, that's what we're in the process of doing, starting with your next meeting, is the adoption of a moratorium to consider the regulations. How we end up with that legislative process, we don't know yet.
As a process observation, I would tell you that I would rather consider the sort of thing you're talking about in the context of the ordinance that we're going to look at, rather than as a non-written proposed amendment to this thing that I haven't had a chance to think about.
All right, I'm just operating under the idea that what's in the general plan guides our ordinances, and that if we're going to consider this ordinance, that it would be good and give it good legal standing to have it also in the general plan, that's all.
Well, maybe, perhaps you would suggest general plan language that might facilitate the ordinance you're talking about.
Well, it's generally true. The general plan guides the ordinances. In this particular case, the intent is to have some public dialogue to establish the policy. So, we could do the general plan amendment as part of that process in addition to the zoning amendment if it looks like we want to put a provision in the general plan. I guess I share the concern about setting the policy before we've had the dialogue. And we could still end up with something in the general plan, but whether, when the dust settles, we end up with that exact type of language, I don't know yet.
I guess my interest was in putting general language in the general plan that refers to preserving and enhancing small-town character of central Brisbane, which is, as I understand it, the legal underpinnings of the regulatory power that we have over chain and formula retail stores.
I think without taking a position on the extent of regulation of formula retail, we could say preserve, the local character or whatever, and take appropriate steps to prevent that local character from being adversely affected by the establishment of formula stores. That neither permits or prohibits stores, at least it focuses on the objective of preserving the local character of the downtown area.
Well, that's fine with me.
I would be more comfortable with that language, because that, I mean, what you were proposing, Mike, was kind of like, wasn't clear.
I suspect we have the same sense.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to leave it to Mr. Topple to weave the language in a perhaps enforceable manner.
Try. I'd like the draft you started with, though, so we can use that as a starting point.
Okay. I will provide it.
Are there further suggestions on this first unnumbered page? Looking...
I have none.
We'll go to the second unnumbered page.
It's got a number on it.
Ah, it does. Page 2.
I, of course, always have comments, but I defer to my colleagues if they would like to start.
Well, I don't have a comment until I get halfway down the page, so why don't you start?
So in policy 251, the very first one, it crosses out work with the Chamber of Commerce. It removes that statement. I kind of like the idea of having something in a general plan that we can point to that says work with the Chamber of Commerce. This is not a major point to me, but it's why we have a Chamber of Commerce. It's why we fund them, I believe.
Through the chair.
Please.
The reason for the rephrasing is one of the things we kind of, the Planning Commission had worked on was keeping the same kind of phraseology of the policy language. So this one starts with an action word, encourage local residents to pay. In the combinations of the programs under that policy, 251A, B, and C, it still will say, and it's a reworded single program that replaces 3 that essentially was parroting the same thing, the same beginning phrase, and now it would say work with the Chamber of Commerce to support business community. So there's a program in there, and it does refer to the Chamber of Commerce. It's just trying to be a little bit more succinct and have an action term to the policy.
Okay. I can live with that. I had some rephrasing of Program 251A where you're combining the previous 3 programs. I crossed out the phrase support the business community by and reordered them so that it would read work with the Chamber of Commerce to revitalize the downtown, develop programs that assist businesses in marketing their services, and help meet the needs of small business. It's just stylistic.
It's more active.
Okay.
I like that better.
Okay, then I can provide this language as well. I have numbers by it and everything, so that was just a stylistic thing. My next comment is on land use, the land use subsection. New policy A, encourage mixed-use development where appropriate to reduce travel by the automobile, and I added the phrase, and provide affordable housing. It seems to me that one of the places where you can do affordable housing is in mixed-use developments.
I agree with that addition and would like you to strike the word "the" by the automobile. It's unnecessary. Any other comments on this policy?
No, I agree with Michael's revision of that.
Now, the next, if I may butt in, the next new program, AA, I'd like us to avoid acronyms in policies. So utilize the NCRO design guidelines. Let's put that in English, please. Any other?
I'm just curious, what does the term periodically review the adequacy of the guidelines to improve the quality of architectural and site design?
One of the guidelines, design guidelines that affect the NCRO1, the both sides of visitation, the first block of San Bruno, the guidelines, design guidelines were adopted, I think, in 2001, several years after the general plan had been adopted. So this recognizes their existence and calls for them to periodically be reviewed and updated, like the plan itself, I suppose. And the guidelines actually address right now most of the issues of architectural and design that you would want. It's just, one, the program recognizes their existence because they were adopted after the plan, and that's essentially what they do. They provide guidance for the Planning Commission and for applicants in the review of remodels to commercial buildings or what have you, as to what the architectural and landscape design requirements and character should be. So it's something we already have and have had for several years, and this just recognizes it and requires, as a program, recognizes it, requires that it be periodically updated as needed.
Any further comments? Any more on this page? Michael?
New program AB. This reads, consider infill sites where the availability of services can support housing affordability and provide a variety of multifamily housing, including apartments. Is this a directive or program for the city to build this? Is this a rezoning program? how is this implemented?
Through the chair, one of the ways I suppose this is implemented is through the process we'll be going through with the land use element, identifying sites. It's similar in a way to mixed use. A mixed use would, sites that also are infill, for instance, as the state teacher's property is an infill parcel, already public services available and public improvements. So it's kind of another method, if you will, of maximizing the availability of services by identifying sites at the same time you identify sites for housing.
So when it says consider infill sites, what you're really saying is identify sites where the availability of services can support housing.
That would be a good change.
I would prefer identify. And I would drop the words "and provide" and substitute "with the aim of providing."
Sounds good.
That sets out what our policy is, not that we are going to be the provider.
Right.
I concur.
Anything else on this page?
Yes.
Please.
On AC, encourage parking below, behind, or beside, and then in parentheses, short side frontage. What does short side frontage mean? Is that short side frontage actually setback?
No, the short side.
Say that
short
past few
side
times.
frontage is it was trying to say that if the parking lot would typically be as are the lots on visitation or rectangles, and so it's saying, you know, that.
Oh, okay.
It's the idea. It's kind of like another way of saying make the parking on the side. It's the short side of the lot that it may not really be clarifying all that much, because I you know, if it does say to the side beside, it probably short side frontage was just trying to emphasize that, you know, or clarify what beside meant. But
Perhaps staff would like to redraft that sentence?
it's fine without that explanatory parentheses in those words. So.
Right. That parenthetical statement confused me.
Let's take out short side frontage.
All right.
Right.
New program AD, consider opportunities for off-street public parking lots with garden walls and generous landscaping where appropriate. I'm questioning off-street parking lots. I'm questioning if that's a program that we really want to pursue as a city. Do we want to build parking lots?
Through the chair, I just want to add that it looks as though that's a new program, but
right.
At 257B on the next page, which would be deleted so that would be inserted there, it actually says develop municipal street, off-street parking spaces. So just to refer that it was a policy that was already, or a program that was already in the plan. It isn't new as suggested there.
Wait a minute, you're saying 252D?
257B. On the next page.
Oh, okay.
Is relocated to 252B.
Yeah.
Right, and so I have the same comment on the next page at 252D. This is a question, I guess, for the council. Do we want to have in our general plan that we want to build parking lots in the downtown Brisbane district?
It strikes me that, well, other comment.
I don't.
If we had the opportunity to put a parking lot without tearing something down or something like that, and I think of, you know, like maybe at some point like the Brisbane M parking lot that already exists, and you know that the city is able to do something where purchase or a lease or something like that, then I would leave it in there and consider that.
That would be an absolutely perfect space, which is already no construction on it. It could easily be turned into usable public parking.
Right, and I even thought about it further, you know, looking at it after reading through the handout that you'd given us with the staff report, Bill. that
Shoup's
that
article.
little vacant building right next to it, is something that, we could certainly look at too, of purchasing that and extending the parking and dropping the building and then maybe having a frontage of a full frontage building and utilizing that. I mean, there's some stuff that, could really probably be pretty good. So in that case, Mike, I would consider it, and I was just throwing that out there, so.
I see a majority of heads nodding.
Yeah. I'll do this on the parking lot. I know, but I just don't think that doesn't seem to me consistent with sustainability and all that stuff. But it stays in. And the last one was policy 252 reads, retain the existing scale, character, and intensity of use of residential districts and encourage mixed use in the commercial district. Now, it's my impression that mixed use in the commercial district would intensify the uses, and so that this policy is internally inconsistent. It says retain the existing character, scale, and intensity, and then it goes on to say encourage mixed-use development, which would increase the intensity of development in the district. What do we want to do? I mean, I'm fine with mixed-use development. I just want this policy to be internally consistent.
Through the chair?
Please.
I think perhaps the clarifier there was supposed to be single-family residential. In the central Brisbane area, of course, includes more than the immediate downtown. It includes all the residential area around it. And I think either the reason that commercial was crossed out, because currently it reads intensity of use of residential. There was a substantial discussion at the Planning Commission about, single-family residential as opposed to multifamily and commercial properties, and that they could be treated differently. And in this case, I think what wanted to be retained was the existing scale and character intensity of the existing single-family neighborhoods within the general central Brisbane area, but not necessarily. But so I think single-family was probably should be added there. Otherwise, it is inconsistent with mixed use.
So this one needs a redraft.
If the council would care to comment on whether, if it read, retain the existing scale, character, and intensity of use of the single-family residential, and encourage mixed use in commercial districts. Maybe it should be rewritten to be two statements. But the idea was this current statement mixes commercial and residential, doesn't distinguish between single-family residential and commercial investment property, and we thought there should be a distinction there.
Yeah, because, but you have both. So, are we trying to address the whole enchilada? Because, you have apartments and single-family and commercial. So, maybe, at the time when this was originally drafted as a residential, was both apartments and single-family. So it would seem like maybe if that's what we're trying to retain, that we just add single-family and multifamily residential plus commercial.
It seems like two policies to me.
That does to me, too.
Yeah.
The one where, because even just the residential, like you're pointing out, Clark, has the high-density residential, the R3 zone and R1 zone.
Mhm.
And then there's the commercial, which is also residential but mixed use. So, yeah, I'd like to see
So
it.
the sense is to divide this into two policies, please.
Yeah, okay. I think it just makes it more clear.
Right.
Page 3.
Well, in policy 252A at the top of the page, this is kind of a question. The new statement, consider adoption of a cap on the maximum floor area permitted in the R1 district. Don't we already effectively have that with a % lot coverage and floor area ratio?
Through the chair, I think the idea was that the RBA, the Brisbane Acres, has a cap on 5,500 square feet. And you're correct, the floor area ratio of 0.72 would apply. I suppose it depends on the size of the lot how big the .72 would allow. And I think it was, the idea was to, like the RBA, to have an ultimate cap as a kind of
I see. So if you have a
prevent
1 acre parcel,
mansionization kind of.
if you amass a number of parcels together in central Brisbane, you cannot build you can only build a 5,500 square foot house, for instance, that I think we adopted in the acres.
And this would be a program that would lead to look at that. It's, you know,
Okay.
need to look at it.
I see. Well, I'm comfortable with that.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, my question.
Please,
That's fine, no, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Please respond.
The only, oh,
Please, go.
I was all the way down at the bottom, policy 255, but if there's others.
How about 253C?
I got B also.
B? Yeah, B, go ahead.
Yeah, I encourage the upgrading and proper maintenance of legal, non-conforming structures. Could you explain that to me?
Well, as we discussed a little bit earlier about if you rezone a property, it becomes legal non-conforming, it's allowed to continue. There are, you know, wherever there are legal non-conforming properties, they may fall into disrepair, and this is just, I guess not all city rezonings, and I'm talking about past history, not of what exists out there now, before now, don't necessarily always lead to higher value. And when they don't, it's a matter maybe of the city that's waiting for the property, the current use to sunset sometime in its future. But if it hasn't been rezoned to a higher value, then maybe property owners tend to disregard the property. And so this program, and again, it's to encourage proper maintenance, legal non-conforming structures.
How would you, as a practical matter, do this?
Yeah. I'm not really sure.
So let's drop it then.
Well, the current program is revise the zoning ordinance to facilitate the upgrading and proper maintenance of structures with legal nonconformities. And that was more of an action of revising the zoning ordinance to that.
That's, yeah, but, and I'm fine with the current language, but this, the new suggested language just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I get it. So just want to keep the current program?
Keep the current program.
Okay.
On the next one, what is a dwelling group, and where do we define it?
This 253C?
Yes.
Kind of the case where you could have multifamily on a parcel, but each is like an individual house unit. So for instance, although I think they ended up being on two different lots, where the fire station was, and Habitat Humanity built 2 small cottages. So it allows a arrangement of small cottages rather than one building with multiple uses in it. Just a...
Is dwelling group a accepted planning term?
It could be groups of dwellings. It's not really a planning.
You're not answering my question.
I've not, this was suggested by, the language was suggested by Tim, and it made sense to me in that it provides a way that allows for detached but yet multi-family development of a parcel. So you can have 2 or 3 or 4 little cottages. You've seen that.
Like a motel.
Well, it wouldn't be a motel. They'd be individually rented or owned.
Perhaps that should go in a glossary.
Yeah.
I guess what you're struggling with, Steve, is what does that mean?
Exactly. This policy doesn't mean anything to me in its language.
I think, but I'm not certain, the term may be defined in the zoning ordinance, but I'd have to look and be sure. I don't recall.
Maybe may I suggest an action item? First action item is speaking to the microphone.
That's, I just was reprimanded for not doing that, sorry.
The second action item is that you and council discuss this policy and see if there isn't a more precise way to frame it.
Or that perhaps it is in the zoning ordinance, and then maybe we need a glossary to...
We need to know that.
Yeah.
Anybody else on this page?
Yes, I think I had one last thing on policy 255, retain open areas in residential zones. Open areas, I didn't have time to look this up in the general plan. Do open areas refer to public enjoyment? Can the public enjoy the open areas, or is an open area in our general plan defined that is just open? I just can't remember.
Open areas are defined in the plan as primarily privately owned parcels, but where but they're public development, so the public enjoys the use of the open areas.
And that's my concern. So what we're saying here in this policy is that in residential zones, basically R1, R2, and R3, that we should have or retain open areas through setback, lot coverage, and landscape requirements that then people can enjoy. In other words, you can go onto their property and enjoy the use of their landscaping or their setback. And I don't think that's the intention. I think it's more of a green landscaping kind of intention.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that was the intention.
Uh-oh. Well, I'm putting up a big fence.
Well, I hear you.
And we discussed that Saturday when we were dealing with the Baylands, and, you know, what exactly is an open area, what's open space. You know, open space, in my opinion, would be something that the public can come on and enjoy. It's a public space.
Publicly owned.
Whereas open areas are your little gardens and your private lots and your private setbacks and all that.
But the public still has access to them.
Yeah.
And that's my concern. In downtown Brisbane, I don't think people are really ready to allow the public to come into their backyard and enjoy their hot tub.
I'm not sure exactly this means that. Maybe it'd have to go back. It might mean something like along the lines of like, well, Cliff's here, so I mean, take Cliff for instance, is that having a open area that is not necessarily defined, it's a right-of-way, right, going up your drive, public right-of-way, right, and something along that line where people can go up there through it, but they're really kind of really close to your property.
They're right next to my property.
Yeah.
Well, a public easement is a public easement.
Yeah.
That's right. I accept the situation.
Yeah.
Can't do anything about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure
But the
what was
term,
meant by this at
well,
the time.
the term landscape requirement is one of those things that I look at it and I say, what does that mean?
There, in the zoning ordinance in most of the zones, and this residential in this statement probably is meaning to refer to multifamily residential, not just single family. But landscape, there'll be a provision for a certain 10% of the area of the lot will be in landscaping, for instance, or 15%. There'll be different standards for different multifamily residential and commercial zones. So that's what landscape requirements.
So this should only apply to multi-residential?
I was trying to look if that's probably what it is. Sometimes multifamily residential that's abutting the street may have a little pocket park, a bus station, a transit station, a plaza area. It's private property, but you know the public uses it.
I guess my suggestion is that this is not clearly enough defined. Folks agree with me?
Well, this is from the original general plan, apparently, so it's just relocated is what it is, so whatever the background was for, at the time, it might be what Bill's talking about. I certainly can't remember exactly what we were referring to, but there are some weird instances in Brisbane, and maybe that's what it was trying to address.
Through the chair, this might help. In the land use element under open areas, it says open areas are parcels of land or portions thereof, primarily in private ownership, that serve to soften the impacts of urban development and otherwise provide primarily green areas and a feeling of openness to the development pattern. Open areas include, but are not limited to, setbacks, easements that are landscaped or characterized by native vegetation, gardens, and landscape vegetation. Might also include golf courses, private parks, recreation areas within private developments. Maybe a combination of hardscape and landscape, typical of plazas, sculpture gardens, and gathering places.
Could we say landscape easement rather than saying open?
No, you don't
that
want
would
to
be
talk
too-
about landscape easements.
Okay.
It strikes me that this policy needs to be re-articulated, to be clear. Sense of the council is
Yep.
agreed?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Page 4. We start on the left. Anything on the left?
I don't have anything marked.
Si?
I have that 259B. City entrances to the city and establish appropriate entrances or gateways, whether through signage, gateway structures, and other landscaping features. To me, like putting in like, I think I've seen this in Colma. There's a boulder, and it looks natural, and it says, "Welcome to Colma." That's what I don't know about these, the other ones, about the entrances and the gateways, and, you know. I wouldn't want to see another Daly Cities thing over Mission Street.
Through the chair, Councilmember Bologoff, this is again, it is a program to study the entrances to the city and look at them and provide possible ideas on treatments to them to identify the city character, as part of identifying the city character to people traveling through or coming in and out of the city. So you might look at, for instance, as you get off Brisbane Cow Palace, there's in what would be southeast sub area there above what is the tunnel that I guess Public Works at one time used it. It's at the end of Van Waters Rogers Road. Up above that on the highway is a pull-out area, for instance. There and to the left is kind of maybe a 25-foot stone wall. Opportunities to to give that a little bit more of a character, like you're suggesting, the natural boulder that's saying welcome to Colma. Things like that at both the main gateways in the south and the north would be something that would be looked at. Perhaps.
I know we've explored this for years about putting signage in the entrance and both entrances into town, because everyone else seems to have it, and all we have is that little thing on sticks saying giving us the wrong population anyway. But I couldn't resist that. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Yeah, I support that. I think that's a great idea, except I'm concerned about humongous structures,
Well, one of the things of having it in the general plan is not only would be something that maybe the Planning Commission would study and look at and make recommendations to the council on, but should somebody want to develop property that was at a gateway location, we'd have it in the general plan that we want we would have some flexibility to discuss, some kind of gateway recognition to the city.
Okay.
No, I'm okay with the program.
Seppi?
This reminds me of what Kent was talking about, Fred Kent was talking about.
It would be something that Fred Kent's group would definitely be promoting.
Right.
It's, in other words, you know, enhancing the community character by creating those edges that define no man's land and the unincorporated to your coming into a place. And that's the role that gateways play. And more communities, through their planning, are looking at the key gateways and what kind of impression of the character and identity of the city that those gateways reveal.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, I think we're fine with that, and I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break here.
Okay, good idea.
Anybody on 261 or 262? Cliff? Of course, name, rank, and serial number.
Cliff Len, 611 Humboldt Road. For policy 262.1, I thought it might be worded better to use your goal number 1, which states design infrastructure and public facilities to be as efficient, cost-effective, and to contribute to the cohesion and character of the community. And then make that policy 262.1 a program. But I would add, I'd say it, actively identify a site and plan for a new community center, or actively identify sites and plan for a new community center, library, and public charter high school in central Brisbane. And then I'd like to also add another program, 262.1B, explore the possibilities of expanding the community park and provide greater opportunity for families and individuals to interact with their park.
Well, let's go to the first suggestion. And would you read that back again?
Okay. Design infrastructure and public facilities to be as efficient, cost-effective, and to contribute to the cohesion and character of the community. That's on the first page of your staff report, which is the goal number 1.
It's the goals.
Through the chair, the first page of the matrix has the goals from the land use element on the left-hand side, and that statement is a goal statement: design infrastructure and public facilities to be efficient, cost-effective.
So it's already in the plan?
Okay.
As a goal.
Okay. Your next suggestion?
Then if we did not have that as a policy, kept it as a goal, then to add the public charter high school to that policy 262.1, because it's just saying a community center and or library. I would like to have a community center, library, and a public charter high school. Looking at that goal of trying to come up with something that is cohesive, it makes sense to have those particular public amenities all within each other. If you have a public high school, you'd want the high school to be close to the library or to a community center that you could use for not only for the community but also for the students.
Council comment?
I don't know, I'm comfortable about the name Charter High School, because maybe if we want to do something... I agree with you that we shouldn't be saying what sort of a high school or how set up. Exactly.
But potential high school site
Yes.
is another...
Yes.
I would go with potential high school
Yes.
site.
Unanimous.
But I think the city manager seems to work.
It strikes me that maybe you want to distinguish between those types of facilities under which you have authority and control over, and those that you don't. So perhaps if you want to deal with the high school, you deal with it as an entirely separate
policy. But that makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. So leave 262.1 as revised, and then maybe come up with another policy.
Let's have planning director and council see if they can make some sense of a policy that, bearing in mind that we're not in a position to fund it or build it, but, or make a decision on it. But, well, we are in a position to encourage, and we are in a position to say, in a planning sense, Site A or B would make more sense than Site C.
Well, I'll give you a piece of history, actually. The 1965 general plan is actually designated a high school, even had a name, Pengate High School. Used to joke about it, Pengate Penguins. That,
and where was the site?
Right where the general area of where the Mission Blue site is right now. So. And Brisbane was going to have a population of 26,000.
And that's, and there was a site dedicated to that, and the school district sold that because they said you will never have enough students here to have a high school.
Right.
And they didn't want to
It took in lieu fees.
dilute the membership of Jefferson because that played a key role in providing education.
You mean the school district has been at cross purposes with the council?
The vision changed.
Yeah.
Well, that may be too. So I think the action item is to draft a separate policy.
And then there'd be a third policy for exploring and expanding the park?
Yeah, you know, in this matrix, I didn't see anything about that particular option, and that was one of the main things that came about during the visioning workshop. So I thought that perhaps that would be something that would work in the general plan, exploring possibilities of
Thoughts?
expanding the community park.
Council thoughts?
I think,
Please, Mike.
I think that this ties in with the discussion that we should be having later about the general plan amendment for the sites identified by staff for the mixed use, all those buildings between City Hall and the community park.
That echoes.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with putting the language in there, but not with the caveat that we're going to eliminate Old County Road according to that drawing.
Yeah.
Because,
I don't think we're going there either.
Yeah, okay.
Did we cover each of the ones you had suggested?
You did? Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else on page 5? Michael?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Say.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Michael.
Program 263D, develop conditions for permitting cisterns.
Program,
It doesn't exist currently. I'm proposing a program 263D, develop conditions for permitting cisterns. It would be under the conservation piece, require water and energy conserving features in new construction and renovation as appropriate.
Right. Because there are people that they're starting to create things like that.
Well, I think gray water recycling might
Yes.
require cisterns as well. I'm not sure, but
It's certainly something I
Yeah.
think that you'd want to encourage, but you'd also want to have some kind of measures on it, control measures.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
so some language to come back to us?
That's all I had on this page. Thank you.
Anything else on this page, anyone?
I just
Sign?
had a question on 265 is continue to encourage recycling for public. Isn't that mandatory now?
To some, we have recycling programs, and there's certainly the C&D waste ordinance and things like that, but this is, I guess we've already accomplished a certain degree of that, so the idea is to continue to encourage and push the boundaries on recycling as much as we can.
Sure, and a lot of that's through education, and
That's correct. I'm done, sir.
Anybody else on this page?
So this stays, right? This stays as is?
Yes.
Thanks.
Page 6? Anything on this side?
I had a question, 266A. It says, seek input from merchants and the public on how Samtrans and other transit serve. Maybe we should drop Samtrans because I don't think we have very much control over Samtrans.
Just how transit services?
Yeah, transit services might be made useful.
Comment?
Well, when they canceled our last bus into town, we did get them to respond by providing us with a free shuttle. But I'm fine with eliminating Samtrans because it gives us more freedom of
Right.
direction.
So we seem to have a consensus. Elsewhere on this page?
That's what I have.
Going once?
I have another suggested program, 266D, develop a shuttle that transports residents of central Brisbane to shopping and employment and other transportation. And I threw in hours, from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So the free shuttle I just referred to only operates, I think, from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m., something like that in the middle of the day. It would be nice, especially in light of development on the Baylands, if we could actually have a shuttle that takes us from here in central Brisbane out to the Baylands to do our shopping and brings us back home.
So you're talking essentially about a shuttle into and out of the Baylands?
From central Brisbane, where everybody lives, because we have to get there somehow.
And that was an important fact brought up at the Saturday function we had earlier.
That makes sense and would discourage passenger vehicles.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Could that shuttle be expanded to go to the BART?
Sure, I have in here in my language and other transportation. It would take you to shopping, employment, and other transportation. And then
Okay, so it wasn't just
You're leaving
Baylands.
it kind of
Right.
generic, not
Thanks.
specific to the
Yeah.
Baylands, because
Correct.
Right.
may not
That's what I
necessarily be, right, Mike?
Yes.
The language is just generic, right?
Right.
Right, the language I had was develop a shuttle that transports residents of central Brisbane to shopping, employment, and other transportation from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Thanks.
Mainly, I wanted something that would take people to commute
Sure.
as well as shop
Yeah.
in all locations, not just Baylands.
That's good.
Have you got that, Bill? Anything else on this page?
No.
Going once, going twice? Anything on page 7?
No.
All right, we're finished with this one. Now, will you reframe for us the discussion that we're about to enter? on
Yes,
exhibit?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, the Staff and Planning Commission has recommended that the state teachers retirement system parcel C on the attachment I that was in your packet next to the Brisbane Shopping Center, and possibly other parcels on Park Lane shown as parcels A and B in the overhead. D, the post office, got marked up there too, but we didn't really, we kind of talked about it, but we didn't really, there wasn't really a strong feeling about taking it, doing the rezone to include parcel D. But certainly C, A, B, and C were discussed. And again, this came out of the Fred Kent placemaking workshops, the breakout groups that went down to the park and the shopping center came up with some concepts about how to create a more a compact, dense village by taking those parcels out of Crocker Park and their industrial kind of uses, or TC, trade commercial, TC uses, and putting them in a mixed-use zoning with a emphasis on housing that would be R3 zone level housing, which is 15 to 30 units an acre. Staff is recommending, and the Planning Commission agreed, that it be at least 20 units per acre, because the provisions in the housing element in terms of getting any credit for it as a affordable housing site, that it should be at least 20 units per acre.
How many acres are we talking about with the A, B, and C?
We're talking about
6.5.
25, I think it's about 6.5 acres, all total. And that's kind of a gross approximation. What the net acreage might be a little different than that by the time you take into consideration any road frontage that's actually in right-of-way. So.
Remind me, please, was there something in the agenda report that specifically states this recommendation? Is this on?
Yes, it's on page 5, discussing, excuse me? It's also on page 1 under recommendations. And again, the staff report explains that it came out of the discussion of the concept of a compact village center from the Fred Kent exercise. Only if you notice the conclusions of the Fred Kent report was attachment A to the staff report, and at the end of that, there's a couple of, at the end of that document, it would be concept A and concept B on page F1.75 of the attachments to the staff report was the concepts that Fred Kent's outfit drew up as a reflection of what the citizens had come up with in concept. And this is kind of in that direction, in that it would bring a greater degree of compact, dense development in and around the village where people could get out and walk around rather than getting in their cars. But it's not quite as bold as those concepts propose, which would require realigning County Road and change the character of the park from its current configuration.
I have the sense that this council is not particularly interested in changing County Road or the park, but is receptive to the idea of doing something with these buildings. And if you got an approval tonight, what would you go away and do?
We would come back at the end of the land use element, and I think the best way to handle this, because as we go through sub-area by sub-area, we're going to find different possible changes, not probably a lot, but changes to the general plan here and there, like this one. Maybe we'll look at the Levinson property again when we do Northwest Bayshore Boulevard. And so at the last discussion on the sub-areas and the land use element, the last preliminary discussions before we revise the plan and come back in a draft form, we will list out the sites that the council and the recommendations of the Planning Commission have identified as sites that would be recommended for rezones in the land use element.
Is that a
So that way, the council can have them all together at one point, rather than making, a decision when you're looking at central Brisbane and you haven't really had a discussion about how that housing might be provided elsewhere, that kind of thing. So at the end of the sub-area discussions, we would say these are the sites that the council seem persuaded were good candidates for possible changes, and then you can have another crack at it then.
With respect to these sites, is that a direction that the council would like to give staff? I'm not sure.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, here's a concern I have, is converting that. I think on these particular sites the way it is, I kind of like the concept, willing to look at the concept of it. But the concern I have is our reactionary thing to ABAG numbers and stuff like this, and that come every 7 years, we start, you know, the domino effect, because these are industrial sites. And that all of a sudden, you know, we're building a daisy chain up to the Northeast Ridge with Crocker Park. Some people may support that, but I don't think that would totally change Brisbane's character, because you would then be up to 26,000 people, like the 1965 general plan. Because one of the things we have to remember that, you know, during the course of a lot of things too, is Crocker wasn't even annexed to Brisbane until 1983. You know, that wasn't really even part of it, even though it was a sphere of influence. But, you know, Daly City really had it on its radar screen for many, many years. And I remember when their police department used to patrol it. Brisbane didn't. Brisbane didn't have anything to do with it, really. And, you know, we just happened to get the annexation, and that increased our employment here, which is part of these unrealistic numbers, I think, that we get from ABAG. It's not because Brisbane built it. You know, we annexed it, you know, and therefore now you get all these job things. So that's my concern, is that we're going to constantly be knee-jerk reacting to ABAG. And I have a pet name for ABAG.
Through the chair. One thing that I think is important to consider, though, with this particular parcel, is that it is the edge, the opposite, it's part of the edge of the community park. And so it's in a sense that land is in the village. It just so happened by annexation sometime in the past, as Councilmember Conway said, you annexed Crocker Park, which was a smart move. Obviously, the history talks about it, the financial success of doing that. However, there is a benefit for, in a two-edged sword kind of thing, is that you're both taking some of that employment off the books, so to speak, by rezoning that M1, that 6 total acres, 6.5 acres of what's now designated M1, and it has a certain employment generating factor that then goes into the big black box at ABAG that comes out with the housing numbers. So you'd be taking away that job generating factor from that 6.5 acres and putting it into housing. So it's kind of like a two for one in terms of this parcel that you wouldn't necessarily get some other parcel that already allowed residential, or that you were adding residential on top of whatever the underlying use already there was. So that, I mean, it's kind of unique in that it has, you know, not only does it comport with a lot of the good planning concepts of new urbanism, compact, transit-oriented development, but it also takes some of the acreage out of employment generating, which is what cranks up the RENA numbers. And given that the city is anticipating improving perhaps some degree of employment generation on the Baylands anyway,
well, how would
be
that
replacing that acreage with, you have the opportunity to replace it with a lot more acreage in TC on the Baylands than here.
I hear you, but looking at the translation of how that translates into ABAG's methodology is they use household growth is 45%, and household growth near transit is 5%, so that's 50%.
Right.
And then, you know, existing jobs is 22.5. And, you know,
I think outside of, if putting aside ABAG just for the moment, it really becomes a question of, if there's going to be some additional growth over the next 22 years, where would it be better to put that growth in terms of the environment, in terms of people's time that they don't spend in an automobile, that, you know, every time you turn over that ignition, it's equivalent in air pollution of driving them, even with all the gizmo air pollution stuff we have in the car, it's equivalent of driving the next 35 miles in air pollution. So, you know, giving the temperature the global warming. It's kind of a smart thing to consider to discourage vehicle miles traveled and travel trips as much as possible. So if you put housing where somebody can get up and walk down and meet you at the shopping center, because it's a short walk, which Brisbane is blessed with by having a compact downtown.
Sure. Yeah.
This really just enhances that compact downtown.
Yeah, I certainly understand the concept, Bill, but there's the expanded part of that, of setting precedents and everything that concerns me. And, Councilmember Barnes brought it up at our last meeting last week about, the more you provide, the more you seem to get smacked with,
Well, just as an aside, and my own view of these ABAG numbers is they're interesting but largely irrelevant. I don't think ABAG is likely to be spending its time suing the city of Brisbane to force us to build 40 units or 30 units or 60 units. I don't think they're that well organized, and I think they've got many better fish to fry. So I'm interested in looking at this simply as whether this is a concept that makes sense for Brisbane, largely irrelevant of what ABAG has to say about it. Now, my view may be incorrect, but that's the way I'm looking at it.
Like I said, at the beginning, I'm interested in the concept, but at some point when we bring this all back, I'd really like to hear from the public en masse, as to, okay, these are some of the major changes that we made, and this is why,
Does it fly?
Yeah, I think that if we, at the end of this entire process, if staff comes back with basically the housing element piece of this, all of the locations where we are identifying parcels that are zoned and suitable for residential development of any kind, then I think we can have a better discussion about whether we want to assign that actual housing to this location in front of us tonight or to other locations in town. And I still think it's a wise strategy to only identify the minimum number of sites for housing at this time that meets our current requirement, not by ABAG, but the state of California. They're the ones who actually give us the housing numbers. ABAG splits it up between counties, but they don't generate the numbers. If we did it then and we just allocated enough sites in town to accommodate the 400 or so housing units we get assigned for this particular cycle, I would feel comfortable with that. And then we could talk about, is this a better location or that better location at the end of this general plan amendment process. And then it would require us every 7 years to come back and amend, zoning or address a housing element to further numbers, but it would not then give, if we do 30 years worth of housing assignment tonight, then after 7 years, how this works.
Then they'll do it again. Yeah.
Exactly. So and I think that defeats the purpose. I think we don't control our development as well. I also had a couple of concerns about housing in this particular site. And one of those concerns is that this Sunday afternoon, I took my son down to play basketball at the basketball court, which is the rectangle G on this diagram here. Basketball court, all 4 baskets were completely full. It was awesome. There were full court games going, half court games, skate park. The place was packed. And that to me says that this park location is activated, as Fred Kent would say. We have 10 uses around the park that keep the park fully used on the weekends. There were 4 jumpy houses in the grass area of the park. There was hip-hop.
There was a bevy.
There was hip-hop going on under the gazebo. The place was on fire. And all I can think is if we add, and I know that the architect for this Site C is here this evening. I think it would be interesting just to hear their kind of thoughts on this site, what they've kind of been playing with. There's no application. I'm just kind of interested in what they would say. But in my mind, I look at a site that many acres, and we're talking about 20 dwelling units per acre, and we're talking about a 6-acre site. So,
well, it's 4.5, that particular site.
4.5, so call it 5 acres.
So 8 85 to 90
That's
dwelling units.
gross, though, so most likely,
So let's-
half acres or more is going to be public amenities.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a before we go off, I just getting a ballpark number of how many people would live there. That many people would be walking to the park. That many people would be walking to the basketball court. Then I think we really do need to look at expanding our park, because to me, this park already is at times at capacity. The times that I want to use it with my son, it's at capacity. Now, thankfully, Brisbane has plenty of other basketball courts in town. We found another basketball court. We had a great time. But I think that's something that needs to be considered.
The point you raised, would we like to hear from the architect for the...
Yes.
I'm okay with it.
Please, assume the position, name, rank, and serial number.
I've been waiting all night. No. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. My name is Rex McLean. I'm with Huntsman Architectural Group, and I'm working with actually Harvest Properties, who's the asset manager for the California State Teachers.
And can you tell us which parcel on the map it is that
That
they
would
own?
be, sorry, I don't have the map.
C.
Parcel C.
Yes. It is
Parcel C.
Which actually it has a large vacant portion to it, as well as the Pitney Bowes. Isn't it Pitney Bowes?
And just for the public, this is a parcel across from the park.
Correct.
And behind the current shopping center.
Exactly, that's correct. So for a sort of a history of how this whole process started from our perspective, a little over a year ago, we were working with Harvest Properties, who asked us to look at that site to see what other sort of uses would be appropriate for it, just as some study purposes. So we looked at strictly retail, and then we also looked at a mixed use, which would be a combination of retail and service use with residential. And then we came down and talked to planning staff about some of our ideas, and we obviously, because we've done some research on the building or the planning code, we realized that the residential component wasn't allowed in the TC zone. So we came down just to talk to them about how that process could work, and just to sort of see how Brisbane might be feeling about such a development as that. And that's when it came up about the general plan update was in the process, as well as at that time we were introduced to the study that we've been talking about by Kent. So, which introduced us to, all these other ideas. We realized all the forces that were possibly affecting this particular parcel. We also spent some time walking around down in Brisbane, just trying to get a feeling for this property, and purely from an architect's point of view, it's really exciting property, because it's not like somebody just says, oh, here's a piece of property, develop a retail building or mixed use, and more or less an isolated environment. Because as we walk through the city, we realize the importance of sort of the town center sort of idea, and how that could really be developed in one fashion or another, whether it was to encourage a connection between Bayshore Boulevard and the park, or to continue the separation between Bayshore Boulevard and the park, and keep it sort of as a protected little environment. So to make a long story short, we realized at that point that we wanted to just, we didn't want to continue to develop any of our plans until we would be able to participate in whatever manner in this process, and to see how things were going. Furthermore, that building is leased out for the next 4 years at least, so it's not anything that's going to be happening in the next year, and we're looking more down the road. So in a way, it's very good timing, because that is going to sit there for a while, and we realize that there's going to be a lot of things that are going on that need to be studied to see what would be the best, not only for the property owners, but also for the city of Brisbane. So we think it would be it could be a really ideal sort of process for everybody in the future. So that's where we are. It's very long-term. I mean, I'd like to obviously see it start sooner, but I think the reality of everything, how it's going, it makes more sense that it goes out a little bit farther.
You haven't said this, but am I intuiting correctly that some sort of mixed-use development or residential development is appealing?
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things I wanted to mention was when you look at the land use diagram and you see the TC zone and how it comes down, and if you look, there's just a little tidbit right at the end, and that's that property. And so it really does make sense from a land use perspective that would be zoned something that would be more appropriate for the city rather than, like some sort of mixed-use type development as opposed to the trade commercial, which is more industrial warehouse office. So it isn't like it's something where you're taking a larger piece and just saying, oh, we're going to rezone this because we want to make it residential or all the other things that are going on. It seems to be a logical separation of that particular piece of property. And clearly, it makes a lot more sense when you just drive down that street and you go around the park and you look, and here's hidden behind these trees is this one-story tilt-up concrete warehouse building. It doesn't seem like a good use for that property for the city of Brisbane.
Questions? Going once? Going twice? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone's coming. I'm cold to the idea of changing this designation of housing. And especially, we're going to spread housing to this area. There's also a proposal to possibly open up the area at the old Pepsi-Cola site for housing. It's suggested here. Yet, throughout our general plan, we talk about maintaining the small-town character of Brisbane. Where's the small town? We're going to start put apartment buildings and commercial right on the main highway. It loses something. Now, I may be wrong, and I'll be fair. I keep an open mind, and hopefully you can show me where that's something that's doable. But right now, I'm cold to that whole idea. I like it just the way it is. And I understand that housing, when you're developing a property, housing is the most attractive thing because that's the quickest turnaround. I mean, let's face it, the Baylands is no exception. So is this, but I'll keep an open mind, so maybe you can persuade me otherwise, but right now, no, sir.
Well, that's why at the end of the whole process is I really want to hear from the community about some of the major changes that, that we're doing. So certainly, Si, I agree with you on that. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
I think another thing you might want to think about when this comes back to you again is taking some of these properties and somehow in the general plan allowing for the possibility, but not necessarily rezoning to a use of housing. In other words, put the burden of proof on the applicant as they come forward, so that the general plan just lays out the potential for the housing, but doesn't necessarily commit the community or the city to do so.
So if a developer on that site wanted to build 60 townhomes and a high school, then that might be a different ball of wax.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's any number of things that might be persuasive to the community on a case-by-case basis. The other point that I'd like to make is that, we have a certain, I guess, visualization of what Bayshore Boulevard is today. And I think that especially as we move forward with the Baylands project, that we really need to rethink what Bayshore Boulevard is. And, we have expectations that we're not going to have a lot of traffic that comes into the middle of town. Part of the reasons that we have the traffic we do today is because the way Bayshore Boulevard is engineered. And I think we have the ability to rethink that. And it might be kind of tricky because we want to make it convenient for people who live here to get in and out, but we don't necessarily want to create an expressway, thoroughfare, sort of boulevard in an area where we're adding more potential business. So something to think about, that just because Bayshore is what it is today doesn't mean it has to be that way in the future.
Other comments? Are you expecting further action or direction tonight?
I'm getting the idea that it would be, the council might prefer, at least kind of, as Councilmember Boligoff just did, at least kind of giving a straw vote direction about this site, but holding any final decision on it being included in any rezone as part of a consideration at the end of the land use element sub-area review. We list out the sites that you've considered, and then you can look at them as a whole and maybe have a better sense of, should we put housing here, should we put housing there, what's the pros and cons of either site, do we have a priority for the 5 sites that have been identified, or that kind of thing at the end of the land use element. So for now, you might just express an indication of what your reaction is to the Planning Commission staff's recommendation about residential in this area, and just put it aside until we get to the end of the land use element.
Well, I suspect we're definitely going to put it aside until we get to the end. Does anyone wish to offer further comment?
I mean, as I said earlier, I would entertain it and want to look at it, and once we get everything all together, and then, really like to have the public take a cut at it, and see what, what's really acceptable to them. And that's the biggest thing.
On the side?
That reflects my thoughts on it as well.
Steve, I just wanted to add something else. When Bill was talking about the reconfiguration of the visitation and the park, there seemed to be a lot of receptiveness to the idea, and Friend Tent was also very excited that that entrance could definitely make the community more engaging in that area. So it would be good to look at that, because there was a lot of community support in that area.
Community support for doing what?
For reconfiguring the park and the street. There are 3, 4 proposals in the back here, in the back of Kent.
Old County Road you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, all these, actually, people,
Yeah, I know. I
did all this-
personally, myself, I'm just saying right now, I wouldn't support that.
okay, then let's
Yeah,
go.
I'm just saying.
And I'm with you.
Then let's drop it. Okay.
I mean, that would make Tunnel Avenue Bridge, why'd we do it?
Yep. Okay, good.
I have the feeling that we've gotten as far as we're going to get tonight. Is that?
Yep, there's nothing else to be said on it.
No doubt.
I'll take the bold step and make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Very productive, thank you.